We have an important tourism town hall today. We wanted to make sure we started promptly at 3 o'clock because we have a lot of content to get through. And most of all, want to make this a true town hall for an opportunity for as many people as possible to ask questions and have a good discussion among some key industry leaders about where we find ourselves as an industry, where we're headed, and what some of the opportunities ahead may be. So let me start by saying welcome. My name is Andrew Weir. I'm the Executive Vice President of Destination Development for Destination Toronto. And as of an hour ago, I now also hold the role of Chair of the Board of Directors of the Tourism Industry Association of Ontario. And it's in that capacity that I will be your host today as my first act in that role as Chair. So I'm delighted to welcome you all here today. We are meeting, of course, on a virtual platform from locations around the province and the country. And I'm here in Toronto, and I want to acknowledge that this is the land that has been cared for centuries by Indigenous peoples, including the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee. Today is, as many would know, is the start of Indigenous History Month. And of course, we were all deeply affected by the discovery of the 215 children at a residential school. And this news brings into sharp relief the importance of confronting our past, actively learning from Indigenous communities, and elevating our understanding. I am very proud of the role that our industry has played in recent years, working with genuine intention and collaboration with Indigenous communities so that they can benefit from the opportunities of the tourism economy, and because tourism can play a meaningful role in fostering a greater understanding of Indigenous cultures and stories. The TIAC Tourism Town Hall Series is an event partnership between the Tourism Industry Association of Canada, Destination Canada, and regional partners. So today that is the Tourism Industry Association of Ontario. And we also want to thank Air Canada, who've been a sponsor of the entire series. I also want to congratulate RTO9 for their AGM and Bonnie and the team just now. And I know the intent was to be there with you, and hopefully we'll have a chance to do that again soon. But congratulations again to you on that AGM today. Now, this town hall is coming at a very important time. On the one hand, there's a path. Here in Ontario as well as around the country, we see a path. We can see kind of discernible signs of the road to recovery. But at the same time, I think we're all very aware that road still feels very long and is fraught with hazards along the way. This is a precarious time for the industry. And while we see the opportunity for there to be opportunity ahead, we're not there yet, and the heavy lifting is not done. And some of the very acute challenges that the industry faces are clearly not behind us by any means. So it means we're having this discussion at a very good time today. Now we'll do this in two parts. Off the top, we're going to hear from some key leaders from TIAC, Destination Canada, and TIO. I'll introduce them more formally in a moment. But then we'll have a lot of time to spend on questions and answers today. And that's really kind of where we'll get into, I think, a lot of the meat of the discussion. We've received a number of questions in advance, and we still have an opportunity for you to pose more questions throughout the session, just using the chat feature at the bottom. I know it's not your first Zoom call, so I'm fairly confident you know how to do this, but just use the chat feature at the bottom, and we will have people monitoring those. I must say that if you ask questions about the Maple Leafs, we will immediately mute your line and disconnect you. I'm sorry, it's too fresh. So those have to be the rules. Si vous préférez, vous pouvez certainement soumettre vos questions en français. C'est pas moi qui va répondre, mais il y a quelqu'un ici qui peut répondre en français. Any questions in French, we will do our best to repeat that content in English. Also, please note today's session is being recorded and will be made available later on the TIAC website. There are also versions of the French presentations available on the TIAC website. If you prefer to follow along some of the initial presentations in French, you can do that there. That is it for the administrative details to set things up. I am very excited about our panel today. We have three leaders that come to us in relatively new roles over the past year, and they are bringing, all of them, a new energy, new vision to their already strong organizations and roles. I have personally worked with all of them over the last number of years, some of them very closely. And I can tell you we are very, very fortunate as an industry to have this kind of caliber of leadership. So let's get to them right now. I am happy to introduce our panelists for today. First, we have Beth Potter, the President and CEO of the Tourism Industry Association of Canada. We have Marcia Walden, the President and CEO of Destination Canada. and Chris Bloor, the President and CEO of the Tourism Industry Association of Ontario. So welcome to all of you. I'm going to ask each of them to offer some introductory comments for a few minutes, accompanied, I believe, by some slides, and then we'll get into questions, which is really where we'll spend the majority of our time. So let's start with Beth. Beth, over to you, and welcome.
Thank you, Andrew, and it's so great to see you, and congratulations on your chairmanship. Tayo is lucky to have you in that role. So I just want to take a few minutes to, first of all, say hello and hello to all my Ontario peeps. Nice to be back. Good afternoon, and please let you know that I'm very happy to be here. Bonjour tout le monde et merci de vous joindre à nous aujourd'hui. As many of you know, I just recently joined TIAC as president and CEO, but of course, I'm no stranger to the industry or to Ontario, having been actively involved for more than 30 years. And you know, I will tell you that my Ontario tourism family is incredibly close to heart. But you know, don't be jealous as I have to find new members to the family as we go coast to coast to coast now. You know, I've been with you every step of the way since the beginning of this pandemic. And so I do understand how hard these past 15 months have been on you and how concerned you are about the future. And it really is because of you that it prompted me to apply for the job at TIAC so that I could continue to do more for the industry, not only in light of this pandemic, but as we come out of the pandemic and start rebuilding for the future. I really do want to thank you for participating in today's Tourism Town Hall and for allowing me to share an update with you on the work that TIAC has been doing on your behalf. Before I start, I would like to take a few minutes or just a moment to acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territories of all of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. We extend to them our deepest respect for their valuable past and present contributions to this land. And certainly, I join Andrew and all of you in paying respect to the Indigenous peoples following the discovery of the children's grave in Kamloops over the last couple of days. Many of you are asking how we are going to get through this and what is TIAC doing to help. And that's why I'm here. To give you an update on our current activities, initiatives, and our plans to lead Canada's tourism economy through to recovery. As you know, TIAC is the national voice for our industry, and we take action on behalf of you, tourism businesses, advocating, promoting, and supporting policies, programs, and activities that will benefit the sector's growth and development. And our office is located and based in Ottawa, but we work closely with our provincial and territorial counterparts, including Tayo. And your new CEO, Chris, and his team keep us up to date on what is happening here in Ontario so that we can address the full range of issues facing this industry. And I'll just tell you that the PTTIA table, one that I've sat at for the last 10 years, is a very engaged group of leaders from across the country. And Chris is certainly a great addition to that table and to the work that is being done there. So in a nutshell, TIAC exists to give you a voice at the federal level so that you can keep focused on running your business. We are here to fight for you, which is exactly what we've been doing, fighting for your survival through this pandemic. For the past 15 months, we've been elevating the issues impacting our industry and meeting with federal officials, including MPs and senators, to share stories of industry challenges and needs. We've been pushing for sector-specific support and for relief programs. From the very beginning of this pandemic, our message to government has been clear. The tourism industry is a vital economic generator and employer of millions. Canada cannot afford to lose its tourism industry. Tourism was the first hit, the hardest hit, and will be the last to recover, and this industry needs support now and through to recovery. Our advocacy efforts continue daily, and we were happy to see tourism repeatedly mentioned in the spring federal budget, which is an acknowledgement of the struggles that you have faced. It is also a step in the right direction by the government in recognizing the value and contribution of the tourism economy and the support required to ensure that we can rebuild. But what does this mean to you and to your business? I just want to highlight a few important pieces of the recently announced budget. But I also want to mention that there are a number of measures in the budget that may not directly be tied to tourism, but do impact our sector. Things that you've heard us talk about before, things like affordable housing, broadband infrastructure, immigration policies, and funding for heritage sites and Parks Canada. The 2021 budget includes a $1 billion package for tourism support over 3 years. This includes funding through the regional development agencies here in Ontario, that would be FedDev Ontario and FedNor, for festivals and events, and towards a tourism relief fund to support investments by local tourism businesses as we come through this, this next phase of the pandemic. It also includes funding to Destination Canada to ensure Canadian destinations are top of mind for Canadians in the beginning, and to entice the return of those high-value international travelers, ensuring we remain a competitive player on the global stage. The Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy and Rent Subsidy are very important programs to our sector. The proposed extensions to September is a good signal towards business support, but we know the sector will need support past the fall. And while we continue to welcome this extension, we will continue our work to ensure that you, the hardest hit businesses, received continued support at existing levels. Now, as mentioned, there are numerous other items in the budget that impact our sector. However, our main priority is to ensure that you understand when and if these supports become available and how to access them. So we will actively be sending out updates and information to industry, as we've done. And if you haven't been seeing the weekly COVID update from TIAC, it comes out every Wednesday, and you can certainly go to our website to sign up for that. So watch for those. And as we learn more through our discussions with government, we will work with TIO to ensure you have this information as quickly as possible. Now, while we share this information with you, I ask you to do me a favor and to continue sharing with us. It's crucial that we hear from you on issues you're facing, particularly pertaining to federal support programs, so that we can work to address them. When we meet with federal officials, I tell your story. I tell your story about losing staff, of losing revenue, and worrying about how you will continue to operate. I highlight what your losses and struggles mean to the community and country in economic impact and the unique needs of this industry. So we will continue to monitor program rollout, and I invite you to participate with us as we move forward. But we also need to start looking ahead. We are committed to championing the recovery of this industry, and that starts with how do we get people moving around our country again. Proof of vaccination has been in the news a lot lately, and we know that this will need to become a common part of travel documentation moving forward. Our efforts are to lead the conversations on ensuring a national approach. We are advocating for a one Canada travel system as opposed to differing regional approaches, which would provide confusion to domestic and international travelers. However, we do know that not everyone will get vaccinated, and that is why it is crucially important that we also plan for testing and processes for those who are traveling without a vaccine. It's our firm belief that travel cannot be limited to only those who have been vaccinated, and that testing and contact tracing will have to be a part of the system going forward. We are also looking to lead the way in changing the current narrative on your behalf. We need public confidence. We need the consumers, Canadians, to understand that when restrictions are lifted, your businesses are prepared to offer experiences following all the necessary health and hygiene protocols. We know just how much work and investment you've put into ensuring your businesses are compliant and ready for guests. We know travel will resume, and we are advocating for a plan. We are calling on government to draw a line in the sand and set a target date to reopen. You can't plan with uncertainty, and we know you need time to prepare, retool, retrain, and rehire before you will be ready to open. We have been facilitating conversations with the Canadian government, but we have also been participating at the global table through the World Travel and Tourism Council, as have Chris and Carol been doing through TIAC. And we all want to make sure that Canada is in line with what other countries are doing as we reopen our country to travelers. We want to make sure that we are part of that seamless traveler experience as people begin moving and we begin to recover from the pandemic. I also want to thank all of you who supported and engaged with us through Tourism Week last week. This was a national campaign, a 7-day event to recognize Canada's tourism economy and the impact that it has on every single community across the country. This year, we called on Canadians to take the 2021 Tourism Pledge, that is, when restrictions are lifted, to travel in Canada first. We saw landmarks from across Canada lighting up in glowing green to support the week, including the CN Tower, Niagara Falls, the London Convention Centre, and many more. And we had messages of support from all parties. So we will be continuing to promote this pledge as we move through the different phases of reopening across the country, continuing to encourage Canadians to travel first here at home in Canada. And we hope that you will continue to support that. Now, before I close, I just want to personally thank all of you for supporting our advocacy efforts and encouraging you to stay engaged and to continue to support the organizations at the local, provincial, and national levels for the work. You know, these are the organizations that are working on your behalf. So I thank you once again for running our town hall today. And I'm really looking forward to our open discussion in a few minutes. And I'll turn it back to you, Andrew. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Beth. Appreciate it. A number of themes in there that I know we're going to get back to today: vaccine documentation and domestic travel, and a lot of what you've already talked about. But let's first go to Marcia from Destination Canada. So welcome, Marcia. Nice to have you. And I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Hello, everyone. Bonjour à tous. It's very nice to be invited to join you today. It's always a great pleasure to be speaking to our partners right across Ontario. Je suis très heureuse d'être ici aujourd'hui. Je vais donner cette présentation en anglais, mais nous avons fourni le document en français aux gens intéressés. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from Vancouver, which is the traditional home of the Coast Salish peoples, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. Now, for your background, Destination Canada is a federal crown corporation, and it's our mandate to help sustain a vibrant and profitable Canadian tourism industry. It's a very broad mandate and certainly has had its challenges in the last 15 months. Normally, we do this through our marketing efforts around the world and here at home, more recently through research that is supplied to industry and governments at every level, through destination development work, and through partnerships that we forge right across the world. Now, as you can appreciate, much of the tourism industry's strength is found in the relationships that we have all built with partners, as you have done so in your communities and across industry. And so it is with us. Destination Canada, TIAC, and TIO have worked together for many years now to bolster our industry's prospects in one of the most competitive economic sectors in the world. Now, before moving on and talking to you about our way forward, I just want to acknowledge how horrifically difficult this past year has been for tourism and for operators both in tourism and hospitality. And I think this slide pretty much says it all. And even for those of you left standing, recovery will indeed be a long and challenging path for many of you. But I do feel that there's much more light at the end of this long, dark tunnel that we've been in. And today I'm going to touch on the work that we've done in 3 phases across 3 time horizons, really. The first, of course, and we're still there, is just surviving this pandemic and the related restrictions that continue to face us, some more stringent than others, depending on the province or territory we're in. Secondly, it's all about reviving market revenue. Relief does not spell recovery, it spells survival. And in order to truly recover, we need to revive the market revenue that spurs our industry. And I do think that there is promise of growth and opportunity for the future that remains. And thirdly, it's about thriving, increasing the vitality of our industry for the long term to ensure that not only can businesses thrive, but that we are delivering net benefits to communities in which we do business every day. So let's start with a brief look backward and the initial response that Destination Canada brought to the pandemic to try to help our tourism industry survive its impacts in this past year. We certainly knew that when travel restrictions were lifted, our first opportunity would be at a very hyper-local level. And in most of Canada, we did see some of that ray of hope through the past summer and through last fall of 2020. And so we worked with our provincial and territorial partners to essentially reverse the flow of funds that we normally have in our co-op marketing efforts, where our provincial partners would invest in our programs, to really reverse that flow and provide funding down to our provincial partners for investing in communities so that they could really promote what there was to see and do at a hyper-local level. And hopefully with Ontario's new reopening plan, we'll once again be able to see some evolution from that hyper-local to an intra-provincial and eventually inter-provincial and international restrictions being lifted. We also invested more than $18 million in other initiatives and partnerships that helped to bring together significant players in the industry, some of whom had huge reach, and to try to extend the buying power that each of our partners was able to bring into the marketplace. And while we're talking about investments, I think it's pretty important to acknowledge that though there is still work to do, we have seen a response from government at a speed and scale at every level of government that has never before been seen in times of peace. And even just at the federal level, over $15 billion has been invested in tourism supportive initiatives over the past year. So government has been there, and folks at organizations like TIO and TIAC continue to raise awareness of what is still needed by our industry. So looking ahead, we're seeing some very strong signals of future demand, all of which pointing in a positive direction. And our research that has been tracking consumer sentiment over the past year shows that, not surprisingly, consumer sentiments about travel and about hosting visitors very much correlates with the real-time conditions that our health authorities are expressing. So with the current strong rollout of vaccine, which seems to be picking up pace, we're starting to see some very good upward trends in consumer sentiment about travel as well. And our research also shows that it's the people of Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec, and to some extent Manitoba, that are feeling the most safe about travel and the most welcoming of visitors into their communities. So they're much more pro-travel than, let's say, the coastal parts of our country, the Atlantic provinces or British Columbia, that are a little less confident about their immediate return to travel. And so people's feelings in other parts of Canada don't necessarily echo the ones you're seeing in your community. Now, 80% of Canadians overall say they plan to travel once restrictions are lifted, but we do know that Canada typically has a huge travel deficit. We as Canadians are among the most traveled people in the world, and we tend to spend on average almost double on outbound travel compared to what foreign travelers will spend coming inbound into Canada. So this year, when domestic travel is really our best and only near-term certain opportunity, we really need to make sure that Canadians keep their holiday dollars in Canada to help speed up our sector's recovery. We really cannot have Canadians sitting on their wallets until international borders open. And in fact, if they spend just 2/3 of their typical travel budget on travel in Canada this year, they can speed recovery by up to a year and create 150,000 new jobs in the process. So a key part of our plan to revive revenue is this multi-phased approach that tries to align our messaging sensitively with the evolution of the health restrictions generally across Canada. And right now we're sort of moving through the influence and inspires phases. And during these phases, we have a couple of key things that we're trying to accomplish. First of all, making sure that we increase Canadians' understanding of the importance of tourism in their communities. And you may have seen our new anthem video that really helps to celebrate the many types of tourism-related jobs and contributions that tourism makes to communities in every part of this country. Secondly, we're trying to inspire more confidence in travel and desire to travel domestically. So not only showcasing many of the new protocols that you've put in place, but also launching our new postcard campaign that in Tourism Week to get Canadians to invite their friends and families to come and visit once they're able to. And finally, reigniting that welcoming spirit that Canadian communities have always had to ensure that they feel ready to welcome visitors back. And as our restrictions start to wane, you will see us start to introduce more and more aggressive calls to action, encouraging Canadians to book their travel now. And of course, we know that many have already done so in anticipation of restrictions lifting. And this is an area where I think you can really help. In these early stages, once travelers begin to get on the road again or fly to new locations, helping to amplify the social sharing that they do with their friends and family and peers is really a critical part of showcasing that groundswell that will give other Canadians and travelers confidence that it's safe to travel and that the experiences that we offer today are as good as they have ever been. So here are just a few examples of our work that is specific to Ontario. In the middle of the screen, you might recognize Sage Paul, who is the artistic director at Indigenous Fashion Week in Toronto. And Sage told us about how important it is that their event and organization is not just seen as selling trends, but really injecting meaning into Indigenous art and fashion by putting intergenerational stories into the fashion that is told by the makers, the artists, the hunters and weavers, and all the members of the design community that take center stage during this event. And we certainly look forward to being back at it in 2022. We're also remaining very active, of course, in our international markets. And we still believe that the US will be our first international market to return and reopen. We will see the initial strength in the drive from drive markets. And we're certainly seeing a surging confidence in travel in the US, and many people are traveling already. 77% of Americans say they're ready to travel right now. And despite what we're all seeing on the news about vaccine hesitancy in the US, only 8% of Americans among higher educated groups in the US say that they are hesitant about taking a vaccine. Now, that may be because they already have a propensity for travel. We do know that higher education tends to correlate with higher income and propensity for travel, and therefore our target audience for Americans. So seeing an 8% number is very encouraging. And of course, we continue to work with our in-market teams globally to ensure that Canada is staying top of mind. And we're very actively now marketing again with our travel trade and travel media partners in international markets. Pardon me. And one example of that is the Boundless magazine that you see on the screen that was published by Virtuoso. So looking a little farther down the road as we wrap up, what's it really going to take for our visitor economy across Canada to thrive once again? We really believe it starts with a new North Star, one that orients us much more toward why our organization exists in the first place, if you think back to that statement I made up front about the vitality of our industry. And our aspiration is really to enhance the quality of life of Canadians through tourism and enrich the lives of visitors. And together with you, we'll help elevate Canada's competitiveness as a destination, and through tourism, enable Canadian culture to thrive, and place-based regenerative economies to emerge in this future world that we're coming into for tourism. So to come on this journey with us, let's please stay connected. You can see some of the ways on the screen right now. Je vous encourage à rester connecté avec nous sur nos canaux de communication. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. And I'll now hand it back to Andrew, I think, who will introduce Chris. Thanks so much.
Terrific. Thanks, Marcia. Again, a lot of themes I think we'll dig into a little bit more in over the next hour, particularly, as you talked about responding to the different readiness levels of customers, tracking that very closely. So appreciate that, and we'll certainly come back to you for some more insights on that shortly. In the meantime, I'm now very pleased to turn it over to Chris Bluer. Chris, as you likely are aware, is the newly appointed president and CEO of TIAC. We're delighted to have him. With that, we've just come off our AGM moments ago, or an hour or so ago. So Chris, with that behind you now, I know you shared some of the updates, so now you get to do sort of a brief version, some highlights of where we are and what you see ahead. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andrew. And first of all, thank you, as we are both from downtown Toronto this afternoon, for doing the land acknowledgement. But also, I think all of us have struggled with what to say about the awful events that have been in the news recently about the finding of the graves of 215 children. And I couldn't put together any eloquent words to express my horror at that discovery. And I really hope, and I'm sure we all join together in hoping, that governments of all levels actually put the proper work into discovering how far this tragedy goes. And I'm pleased to see that the Ontario provincial government this morning has planned to also do searches in other known residential school areas to ensure that we get to the bottom of this and that justice can be served for those that have lost their lives. I think particularly for those parents on the call today, what those people are having to live with is just something that is unimaginable. So my thoughts are with them at this awful time. Apologies for those who were on our call earlier on the TIAC AGM. So some of this information you will have already heard, but I'm going to crack on. I want to thank Destination Canada and TIAC and their sponsor Air Canada for the opportunity to take part in this afternoon's town hall meeting. In my short presentation, I'm going to take you through some of the challenges we have faced in Ontario, some of our legislative successes, and what lies ahead. I'll also speak to you how TIAC is looking to adapt to increase our influence, build new coalitions, and mobilise the tourism industry as a whole so that we can become a major voice in economic development and policy. Unfortunately, there's no more important place to start with than the impact of COVID-19 on our industry here in Ontario. Now, prior to COVID-19, Ontario's tourism industry represented more than 400,000 workers and over 200,000 businesses, with an economic contribution of $36 billion, and annual tax revenues for the province reaching up to $5 billion. Tourism was the largest employer of young people between 15 to 24 and was proportionally one of the biggest employers of women. And for every $1 million spent by visitors, 13 new jobs and over 600,000 wages was created. Tourism in Ontario was experiencing a period of exponential growth year over year. In the 10-year period from 2006 to 2016, Ontario's tourism receipts had risen from 23 billion to 34, and TIAC's own research highlights that 65% of businesses had seen an increase in their revenues between 2018 and 2019. And of those, 5% had experienced a 50% increase in sales and revenues. In many rural communities, tourism has replaced lost manufacturing industries as the key economic driver for their local economies. Now, the impact of COVID-19 on Ontario tourism has been catastrophic. The tourism and hospitality industry in Ontario has suffered a perfect storm of closures, restrictions on operations, and plunging consumer confidence. The tourism industry is built on creating experiences and memories that Zoom can only replicate to a certain extent. You can't Uber Eats that special trip with your friends and family in a short-term rental property. Skip the dishes can't provide you a breathtaking view or adventure of a lifetime, and you can't enjoy a cruise via curbside delivery. And despite some of the incredible examples of innovation and the resilience that is built into the DNA of this industry, the economic statistics tell the story of the catastrophic consequences of COVID-19. For 15 months, successful operators have seen revenues disappear overnight. They've been forced to lay off their staff and take on large amounts of debt to survive. In Ontario, the average revenue loss for our members has been 69%, but for over a third, it's been 90%, meaning 81% of tourism businesses have been forced to take advantage of at least one government support program. Tourism has lost over 140,000 jobs in Ontario, and 27% of businesses have taken on over $100,000 of debt. The severity of the last 15 months means that 71% of businesses have told us that without those government support programs, they would have closed permanently. It is these damning statistics that has shaped TIAC's response to the crisis, pushing the provincial and federal government for key economic packages to support the solvency of our industry. Now, in January and February of last year, international and domestic group bookings had started to cancel, and hotel occupancy rates were starting to fall significantly. Like the ill-fated canary in the coal mine, as COVID-19 spread ferociously across Europe, TIAC knew that it wouldn't be long before Canada would soon be gripped in crisis. TIAC's member surveys would help us track key metrics on revenue losses, layoffs, cash flow, and now on debt and levels of government dependence. Armed with stark statistics and personal testimonies, TIAC's tourism delegations to AMO conferences and our best ever and biggest ever Tourism Day at Queen's Park events took on an even more importance, as we argued the urgency of the situation and the need for action. TIAC engaged the media and press to ensure coverage of the tourism industry during the pandemic, securing key television appearances and articles focused on Ontario's hardest hit industry. As early as March 2020, TIAC was one of the first organisations calling for a wage and rent subsidy and direct access to credit. Our data was fed into government, and in April, the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, or CEWS as it is known, was created, a programme that was at one time 64% of our members in Ontario were accessing. The Canada Emergency Business Account, CEBA, was also created in April, and currently 63% of our members have had access to up to $60,000. TIAC has also helped to correct poorly designed and performing programs, such as the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program that was latterly replaced by the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy. Provincially, we've built new coalitions with the Ontario Chamber of Commerce and CFIB to support and lobby on behalf of the tourism industry. Provincially, the government has waived payroll taxes, paused permit renewals, and offered rebates. Then Finance Minister Rod Phillips announced in November 2020 the creation of the Ontario Tourism Travel Tax Credit, with a financial envelope of $150 million designed to incentivise Ontarians to travel within Ontario when restrictions were lifted. TIAC's own pre-budget submission for such a programme featured heavily in the budget document, detailing the reasons behind its creation. TIAC's lobbying for direct financial support was also reflected in the most recent budget in March, when the Tourism and Travel Small Business Grant was created and the Ontario Tourism Recovery Programme announced on March 24th. But we know for some of these programs, they were too late for some of the businesses in Ontario, or some businesses haven't been able to access them. That is why our lobbying for economic support is year-round and doesn't finish with a government announcement. I have and will always see our role as an honest broker with government, prepared to tell them when a policy isn't working or when changes are needed. Now, as we look to the future, uncertainty remains the most significant challenge to our industry moving forward. Uncertainty on whether government support programs will continue into 2022, the speed of which government restrictions will be lifted, when interprovincial travel will restart, and will our international borders be reopened soon? And what will vaccination passports or certificates look like? Will consumer sentiment and confidence to travel reflect the pent-up demand to travel? And will government investment, marketing, and communication strategies help stimulate our recovery? But those are not the only challenges that face our industry. In just over a year, we're likely to have had both a provincial and federal election. How the recovery is progressing will likely dominate the debate on economic policies. Both the federal and provincial government have taken on significant levels of borrowing and debt to navigate the COVID-19 pandemic. That money will need to be paid back, and that will require public spending cuts, tax rises, or a combination of the both. The tourism industry adds to the fabric of our communities and showcases our cultural contribution to the world, but it is also one of the safest economic bets. Tourism creates jobs, economic growth, contributes to the infrastructure projects around our province and around our nation, and as showcased before COVID-19, was growing at an exponential rate. It is imperative that our industry continues to maintain our profile as a key economic contributor and mobilizes our industry for the inevitable challenges that will come with potential austerity measures. TIAC will be looking to ensure that we play our role in advocacy efforts by reimagining our digital infrastructure and seeking to leverage the size of our industry to mobilize grassroots campaigns for all political parties to continue to support the tourism industry and the issues that matter to us. I want to thank you for your time this afternoon, and I want to make sure that we have as much time as possible for questions. I'd like to thank many of the people on this call who have been part of our advocacy efforts over the last 15 months. I said on our AGM call when we went through some of the legislative achievements that we've had, it is not a singular effort. We have only achieved these things through collaboration, and I'm really and truly grateful for the support that many of you have provided TIO over the last 15 months, and I know, and I'm sure Beth feels the same as well. I want to thank you for your time again today, and I'll pass back to TIO's incoming, new chair, Andrew. I'm sorry, I demoted you for a second there, Andrew, so that we can start the question and answer portion of this event. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Marcia. Thank you, Beth. It's interesting to hear what is clearly some distinct mandates for the three organizations, but a tremendous amount of consensus and alignment of strategy. And again, as an industry, we are, I'm consistently pleased and impressed and proud, frankly, of how we work together as an industry across the country, across the province, and I think we'll see more of that today. So let's get right to some questions. To our audience watching at home, this is your warning. We're coming to you. If we were live in a theater, I'd do the Phil Donahue thing in the audience, but instead, you're just going to have to use the chat at the bottom, maybe a nostalgic reference for half the audience. Well, please do use the chat. We have people monitoring that. The good news is we received lots of comments and questions ahead of time. So what I'm going to do is consolidated some of those into a few themes that really came up as some of the more prevalent questions where people there's a lot of kind of energy and curiosity and I think anxiousness about some of these issues. So we'll start there, but we will keep monitoring the questions as well and hope to get to some of those. So let me start. Beth, we'll come to you first. I want to ask you about the borders. I know everybody wants to know about the borders. What is your sense of, I won't just ask you to predict when they'll open, but what do you think is going to be necessary? What will be the preconditions that are necessary and the steps as you imagine it to a reopening of the borders?
Well, thank you, Andrew. And first of all, I think you make a great Phil Donahue. So we've heard from the health officials. We've heard from Dr. Tam. We've heard from the Prime Minister. And just last week, we received the report from the expert panel on testing around what kinds of things are being taken into advisement and what kind of measures are being looked at as far as when we can reopen the border. We don't have any kind of firm date at this point, but what we do know is this, that the more vaccinations that get into the arms of Canadians, the more second vaccination that gets into the arms of Canadians, the closer we are to border reopening. In my conversations with government over the last, even just in the last week, the tone is starting to change as far as the willingness to talk about what that looks like, and the information that is being shared is starting to allude to the work that's being done behind the scenes. Work that's being done at CBSA, for example, on making sure that they have the amount of staff that they're going to need in order to handle any new processes at land border crossings. The work that's being done with the air industry and other industries on what does a proof of vaccination or a proof of immunity look like? How are we going to manage the movement of people across the border, whether they've been vaccinated fully or partially, whether they have had COVID and have recovered and therefore have some portion of immunity, whether they're not vaccinated or whether they're exempt. So all of these conversations are ongoing, and we are at the table. I was on a call just before this one, which is unfortunately why I missed the AGM, but I was on a call with Transport Canada and CBSA and all of our partners in the aviation sector talking exactly about these kinds of things. So the long answer to a short question is no definitive date yet, but if the modeling works out the way that we think it's looking like, we should expect to see the potential of the border reopening towards the end of summer.
Thanks, Beth. Marcia, do you want to add anything to that one?
I was just going to make that exact point. Destination Canada has taken what our health authorities have said with regard to 2 doses, 75% with 2 doses. And given the current supply chain expectations and the rollout rates, our modeling shows that we should reach that point late summer, being not the tourism summer, but the calendar summer, which is end of September. And so this is not official. It's simply modeling that we have done based on those other factors. So we're thinking that will be our first opportunity, and there may be staggered opportunities that immediately follow with other destinations and source countries such as the UK. So,
before I guess the border opens, recognizing it's still some time before that happens, there's an opportunity in interprovincial travel within, the domestic travel, but within the country. I know we're seeing a lot of different approaches in different provinces. Chris, do you want to maybe start and talk about what we're seeing in Ontario as it relates to Ontarians, people being able to travel into Ontario, but also the ability of Ontarians to travel elsewhere? And then Beth and Marcia perhaps add sort of more some of the national perspective on that as well.
Thanks, Andrew. I think one of the things that we've learned from this whole process is that we are all going to need some sort of academic qualification to understand and comprehend all of the different reopening plans that are out there across the nation right now, and the differences between stages and color coding and how that all comes to fruition. But we're in a slightly frustrated position in Ontario at the moment. We've just had our reopening plan published by the provincial government. I know that there are many people on this town hall right now who would love some more information to accompany those guidelines in terms of capacity limits, in terms of what restrictions will be in place for people to enjoy some of the tourism activities that people want to do this summer. But I think we are in Ontario, we are suffering from the fact that we had a very significant third wave, and we have a government taking a very cautious approach to reopening. And I know that we are due probably to enter stage 1 of our reopening plan around June 14th, June 15th. We've had some excellent reductions in our case counts in Ontario in recent weeks. We were down to in the 600s this afternoon, so that is really positive news. But we are working with the government every day to encourage them to consider potentially lowering the number of days between us entering each stage, and doing everything that we can to get our tourism industry restarted in Ontario. We're making incredible strides on our vaccination rates, and we've heard some really encouraging news from Dr. Tam on a national level about what is required for us to be able to restart some of the activities domestically that the tourism industry will be able to take part of. And that was 75% for the first dose and 20% for the second dose. And I'm really hoping that with our accelerated rollout of the vaccine, particularly in Ontario, that we might be able to start returning to provincial travel across Ontario as quickly as possible. And Andrew, you would probably expect me to say this, whilst I do want us to get to a position where the whole of Canada is traveling again. I would encourage everybody to first re-explore Ontario and spend their dollars in Ontario, because our businesses really deserve it after the last 15 months they've had. So hoping that we're going to be able to start quicker than perhaps the reopening plan says at the moment, but really hopeful that we are going to have a positive summer in the end of it.
Andrew, I wonder if I'd just jump in for a sec. Again, the modeling on the 20% that Chris just referenced, we're seeing that 20% number for Canada as a whole being reached in mid-July.
If I could just pipe in there as well, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the work that we're doing as far as getting the borders open between provinces, and really I will tell you that we have been messaging government on the need for leadership at the federal level for a one travel policy for all of Canada and not 13, because as we do begin to open and we start to see people traveling across the country again, and eventually when the borders open, we don't want to create confusion. We want a seamless experience for everyone. To that end, I will tell you that TIAC has been doing a lot of work with partners and coalitions in the last few weeks. And so you may have seen that we were a signatory with 60 other business leaders to a letter that was released by the Chamber of Commerce to the federal government calling for a plan to reopen. We've obviously been doing work over the entire pandemic with the Hardest Hit Business Coalition, but the other places that we've doing work and what you will see messaging coming out from in the coming days and weeks. We're working collaboratively with the members of the TIAC because we need to get the premiers across the country to support the movement of people and the opening of the borders. The Canadian Travel and Tourism Roundtable is also just released their response or their impression of the expert panel report and is also calling for a plan. The Future Borders Coalition is also calling for a plan. We are, and TIAC is ingrained in all of these coalitions. And in fact, I'm now co-chair of the Canadian Travel and Tourism Roundtable. We are there. We are having these conversations. We are talking to media. We are talking to parliamentarians of all stripes to try and really impress upon them the urgency of not having 13 travel policies, but having one and getting the borders open so that we can begin to plan. And even if you're not going to open the border until the end of the calendar summer, like the end of September, at least make that commitment that you are, so that businesses can start to plan, so that we don't lose not only our summer, but we don't lose the fall and the last quarter of the year either.
I think, it's certainly a theme we've heard a lot about the need for clarity and the need for planning and the need for established benchmarks, and kind of heard you all speak to that. Chris, you talked about the opportunity, as borders remain closed, even some interprovincial travel remains, out of reach for some people in different provinces. There's an opportunity embedded in that as well. And I know, speaking personally, last summer, my family traveled around the province. We explored beaches on 3 different Great Lakes and discovered hiking trails in parts of the province we never had found before. And I think, amidst all of this, there are some potential gains in domestic and local exploration and travel that we can leverage this opportunity to lock in. So, maybe, Chris and Marcia, I'd love to get your comment on this, working as you are on sort of inspiring domestic exploration. What is the opportunity ahead of us, and how do we tap into that as individual businesses and then as the collective industry as we are here?
Thanks, Andrew. Well, that's a question, Andrew. I hasten to probably start it with the fact that I suspect everybody who is taking part in this town hall today, who are operators or work for business, are saying, listen, we're ready to go now. We've got the protocols in place. We know how to deal with restricted capacities. We know how to keep people safe. Traveling is not an unsafe activity. I just want to be very clear about that. I guess the opportunity comes as soon as we know more about what the restrictions will be over the summer period, because one of the frustrating things at the moment is that we can't incentivize or encourage Ontarians to start booking some of those experiences in Ontario right now, because people simply don't know what they'll be able to take up or what businesses will be able to offer them. And so, this is one of the opportunities that we could potentially be losing if we don't get that extra detail on what the principles and guidelines actually mean in provinces like Ontario. I think there is definitely a pent-up demand that people want to get out and travel. And, forgive me, Marsha, for recycling your phrase about if we could just push some 2/3 of the money that leaves these shores and put it into our domestic market, and then we'll go a long way for protecting a lot of jobs in the tourism industry and safeguarding our industry moving forward. I'm sorry, Marsha, it sounds weird me saying that and not you saying that, but this is super important. But Andrew, it's not just it's an opportunity that isn't guaranteed right now. And that's something that everybody in this town hall is working to try and achieve. We want to give clarity to the tourism operators out there in Ontario and across the nation so that they can say what they can offer to the consumer. And, listen, it takes a long time for some of our industries to get going. You can't just turn them off and on with a light switch. They need to hire people. They need to train people. They need skilled people in place. And so, Andrew, your question, I'm not answering it in the way that perhaps you expected, but I'm saying actually it is the call to arms as us as tourism leaders that we have to give people the opportunity to try and attract Ontarians to our province. Listen, I think the best way I can advertise what is available in Ontario is the fact that, from my accent, I'm a Brit. I moved to this country a couple of years ago. I explored Ontario. I loved it. So I decided to pick up my family and stay here. So I'm a pretty good advertisement of the experiences that are available just within this province. And so what I'm going to be concentrating, Andrew, is trying to get those information on capacity limits and guidelines and restrictions and getting them lifted and increased as soon as possible so that people on this call can actually start trying to attract people to the province. Because Minister McLeod refers to one I think it's one world or one country and one province, and I think we have exactly that. But people just want to get started and start doing what they do best, which is providing those experiences to people.
Thanks, Chris. Marsha, at the national level, how are you kind of approaching the opportunity to close that travel deficit and attract domestic travelers?
Well, I think as I touched on earlier, there's a logical succession of how things will open up. Perhaps not as hyper-local as it was last year, but certainly within province, followed by interprovincial and then international. It's highly unlikely our international border would open before our provincial ones do. So we need to work through those stages. What I will say is the opportunities I see in the short term for operators really will be very similar to 2020. We're going to see rural and resort locations do very okay, notwithstanding the occupancy restrictions that remain in place. I mean, if you're still trying to operate with 60% of your rooms available and some closed, then it's not a banner year, but at least you'll have business. Canadians very much are still very focused on outdoor activities, camping, boating, hiking, rural resorts, as I said. And the key problem that we've had and that we need to face as an industry is how to revive our cities. The keystone species of our industry are the city gateways, the airlines, and the hotels that service them, both for leisure travelers as well as business meetings that are contributing to the overall economic engine of Canada as a whole, not just for tourism. And so, our focus, we know very much the provinces and territories will be encouraging people to travel within their own province or in their own region and see what there is to see and do with their family. But they've asked us to till the soil on that interprovincial, intercity, city getaway area so that we're sure that we have healthy cities that really form the starting point for most international travel into the rest of our region. So we'll be looking for family travel, but also mature couples, high value travelers to really come back to cities and experience the modified attractions, the great culinary, and the parks, lakes, and beaches that we forget exist in our beautiful Canadian cities. So that will be our job in this context.
I appreciate you saying that, coming from an urban perspective, as I do. And it's important because we've seen urban recovery lag very significantly behind some of the other types of travel. People who are traveling are kind of looking to get away from places where people are clustered together. Most of the time, the urban vibrancy that we sell here is a great thing to sell, but it's not what people are looking for at the moment. So it's certainly a challenge. An
urban exodus, as we call it.
Well, it's...
Can I just tag in here on this, Andrew? I think one of the things that we need to encourage as these stay-at-home orders are lifted is a return to work in the office. as we look at our urban centers, if we can start to repopulate our urban workspaces and encourage people to get comfortable with that, that will go a long way to helping us, revitalize the urban space. And we're seeing that happen. We're watching what's happening in other countries, and we've got an absolutely very close example with our neighbors right next door in the US, and we're seeing what's happening, and it is a return. It's a return of public confidence in travel. It's a return of public confidence in gatherings, and it's a elimination of resident resentment towards travel. And those are things that we have to conquer in order to see this revitalization happen in its fullest. We can open all the borders, but if Ontarians or Canadians are saying, but we don't want you here, we've got a problem. And the other problem that we have is, we've got a federal government who is kind of hanging on the precipice of an election. And right now they're looking at the numbers, and the numbers are saying 50% of Canadians don't want you to open the border. So that's 50% of voters that are saying don't open the border. So why would the government go down that road as well? So we've got, there's a number of factors that are playing into this, and it's which makes it even more messy than just a pandemic.
So without even knowing it, you've set up my next question perfectly. And that is this idea of resident sentiment towards travel and about welcome. I find it, for all the years I've been in this industry, I've never, ever once had to question whether or not Torontonians, Ontarians, Canadians were willing to welcome other people. It was never something we even contemplated. We never tracked it. We never measured it. Why would we? It's our DNA. Of course, we welcome people here. And yet now we see these strikingly high numbers about people, about a real resistance to people coming in, either from other countries, even other parts of the country. And for much of the last year, we see it, a lot of the rural areas around the big cities don't want people from the cities traveling there. So it's a real issue. How, I'll put it back to you collectively, the three of you, as a question that is, what do you see as the key to kind of starting to defrost that resistance towards welcoming people from away, and because there is no tourism business without it.
Well, I'll start it off, and then I'll let Marcia and Chris jump in. But I think we need to change the narrative, and we need to stop talking about the fact that travel and tourism is not safe. We have been admonished by our government officials for 15 months now to stay home or you will die, basically, and we need to stop that. And we need to start talking more about the protocols that our businesses have put in place to mitigate the spread of the virus. We need to start talking about the transmission rates associated with travel, which are minuscule. We need to at the local level get out and show our residents how important the visitor economy is to their local economy. If we see a return to visitors, we're going to see a return to jobs, not just in tourism related businesses, but in other service related businesses as well. And I think we need to start demonstrating, we need to start talking about that, but the message of the message and the leadership, we can be out there being a lead on this narrative, but we also need to start hearing it from the medical officials as well as from our senior politicians.
Anybody else want in on this one?
I'll jump in. I think from the research we've been doing over time, we can see how closely consumer sentiment tracks the health regulations and the words from our political and health leaders. So as Beth says, having that narrative change, being more encouraging, saying it's safe, all of those things is important. As you're all aware as well, this whole notion of hygiene theater, don't hide what you're doing and doing it on the night shift. Make sure it's visible to your customers. all the investments you've made and the rigor that you're putting into keeping your staff and guests safe. Make sure that, as I mentioned earlier, share every visitor that you have and encourage them to share their experience with their friends and family, because that builds confidence and becomes the, I told two friends and they told two friends, and there's the exponential growth and confidence that will come from the real experience. And finally, probably the biggest and best thing that you can do right now, or as soon as your turn shows up, is get vaccinated and tell everybody you know to get vaccinated. That is what will really turn the tide for this country and indeed the world.
I'm going to change direction a little bit and just move on to a different topic that's come up in a number of people have raised this question, particularly in some of the advanced comments and questions, and that's about the workforce. And I know it's an enormous source of concern for so many businesses, and particularly because all the other sectors that are returning to work before our sector, our people are looking for work elsewhere, and that that will leave us in a very, very precarious situation as it relates to being able to staff up when suddenly we're able to open again and the people just aren't there to do it. So one of the questions related to that we received in advance was related to the pathway for new students entering the industry, but then there are other questions related to how do we kind of retain the workforce, the skilled, trained workforce that's been faithfully part of the hospitality industry for a long time. How do we retain them while they sit on the sidelines? We can't bring them back yet. So, anyone, I don't know if Beth, Chris, do either of you want to start with that one and comment on some of the strategies that you're either aware of or have seen and can recommend that businesses and collectively we can be engaging to retain that workforce?
Well, I will say that, we know through our friends at Tourism HR Canada that we not only have lost more than 500,000 jobs from our industry, and that number has grown, and it's grown in importance because it's not just that those people are sitting at home waiting to be called back. They have gone on. A lot of them have moved on to other industries because they continue to need to keep a roof over their head or put food on the table. So we have, and then we have a disillusioned section of our workforce that is now looking at our industry and thinking, maybe it's not stable. And we need to address these. We need to be head on with this. There are other strategies that we can be using. Talking to, getting immigration policy adjusted so that as immigration resumes, the skills and competencies that we need in our industry are priority on the immigration side. Absolutely, we'll be doing that work. But from a just, again, I go back to the messaging and the way in which we are conducting ourselves. We need to continue to talk about the fact that tourism is not this part-time job or job till you get a real job or an accidental job. Tourism there's opportunity for careers in our industry, and we need to do a better job as an industry of showcasing that. We're going to have to, just from across the country, we're going to have to get on a real campaign that showcases how great it is to work in our suite of sectors and how many amazing opportunities there are, because it's not just all frontline, and it's not just all back of house. There are just some amazing opportunities, and if we can combine that kind of outreach with some changes to our immigration policy so that we can acknowledge the global workforce that is the tourism industry, we could be opening up a whole lot of doors for a whole lot of people.
Chris, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, And I don't want to sound like a broken record on this, but there are employees right now at home who are looking at reopening plans in their province, like Ontario and other provinces across the country, who are looking at their reopening plans and speaking to their employers, and their employers aren't able to tell them when they're coming back to work because they don't know how big their operation will be. They don't know actually what part of the stage they are part of reopening. So every day that we are having this discussion about what our actual reopening looks like is another day we're losing people from our industry. It's another day that those Tourism HR Canada statistics about how the employees view our industry, and it's only going in one way, on one direction right now, and that's negatively, is reinforced because they're ringing their employers and they're being told, we don't know when we can bring you back. And so anybody, as you would expect, responsible people are looking about how they can provide for their families and provide the income that they require for, to pay their mortgages. And so people are looking elsewhere. And so one of the things that we're really keen to do over this summer is to get out. We're going to get out of downtown Toronto. We're going to go and see these people on the front line. We're going to talk about the micro credentials that make up the jobs that we don't often talk about in our industry. We don't talk up the skills you need to work within our industry, and how big companies in senior leadership positions are crying out for the skills that people have within our industry. And so we have a responsibility as industry leaders to talk up our workforce more, but we also have a responsibility to be able to give employers the ability to tell their employees when they're coming back. And so I apologize to returning to that point yet again, but we've got to get people some certainty about when they're going to be getting pay packets and when they're going to be able to get back into work. And I think that's the most important thing as leaders we can do right now.
I'll just add one small point to the great comments that have been made so far. It's a critical constraint to our industry in going forward. And it's not just labor on the front lines, which is kind of the nearest term issue, is reestablishing a suitable sized workforce and with the skills necessary to deliver what, the kind of hospitality we're accustomed to. There's also been a ravaging, I would say, of the executive and management level of our industry, many of whom have undergone significant furloughs that have caused them to move on and get jobs in other sectors. And to Chris's point, may not see a compelling reason to come back other than just love of the industry. So it's a concern at every level, and I think we'll feel it first on the front lines, but over time, there's been a huge gap created in the managerial level of our industry.
One of the questions that's come up again a couple of times is not only about the timing of return, but also what does that return look like? And the question was related to vaccinations, and what does it mean for staff to be returning to an environment where some of the patrons may be vaccinated, some may not? How are they going to be on the front lines being asked to manage and to process and identify? And so and then it speaks to the interoperability of vaccine and testing documentation and the ability to recognize that through some sort of harmonized standards. So there's kind of the frontline pick question there, but then there's also the vaccination documentation. Beth, you touched on it a bit earlier, but does anybody want to take that one as far as what it means to come back and have to address and respond to those vaccine identification issues?
So the position that we're taking is that proof of vaccination should be at point of entry into the country, and not as people moving around. And I was just noting Dharmesh Patel's comment in the chat box about, are business owners going to have to be making that decision? Are they going to have to portion off parts of their restaurant? Vaccinated people can sit over there, non-vaccinated people can sit over there. Are we going to have to, affirm, that you've got your vaccination in order to attend a conference or a live theater production? And we're saying no. That obligation should not be on business owners or operators. As capacity limits are increased, as restrictions are lifted because the vaccine count has gone up, that should be enough. And that again, we're only really looking at proof of vaccination or proof of immunity for entrance into the country. And we have to assume that as our vaccination rates go up and increase, that Canadians are vaccinated. When the numbers get to the point where we can assume that 75% of Canadians are vaccinated, then we should not have to be asking for proof of that, if you want to go to the movies.
I think the only thing I'd add, Andrew, is just want to pay credit to Beth. From the very beginning, Beth has been very focused in showing that we don't get into that situation where there are barriers for people who can't be vaccinated for or choose not to be for whatever reason. And so I really appreciate Beth's work on the national level for ensuring that that's part of the discussion. But I also think that there is a role for us on PCR testing and vaccinations in terms of getting some events and some businesses going now, because I always think it's going to be the industry that directs the direction of travel on this, and rather than the government. And so internally now we could be replicating some of the situations that are happening in Europe and in North America, where people can take a PCR test, have a negative test, and then they can go to their sporting event or their festival or event. And they've proven really successful. In the UK, they've had nightclubs open fully indoors. You have a PCR test, you can go in, and there have been no issues of transmission or breakout. So I think Beth's absolutely right. There can't be barriers put in place for people to take part in activities or visit restaurants, etc. But I think now that we have the opportunity to use testing to restart some of our economy earlier, and I think the government should be looking at doing that more, because we can't just keep waiting until we hit a certain point of vaccinations or COVID cases. We could be doing stuff now safely, and I know there are people on this call who've suggested test events in and around the province that we could be pushing ahead with and doing. And if we follow the examples of some of the other countries, we might be able to start getting some revenues flowing safely into some of the businesses on this call.
Yep. And there's another question in the chat about this around employees or employers requiring employees to be vaccinated, and we're not wading into that you start getting into human right issues at that point. And so I would be encouraging people to get their vaccination, but you can't make it at this point a condition of employment. That's, I think, a non-starter. There are lots of reasons why people won't get vaccinated, and if the reason that they're not is hesitancy, and they see more and more people getting vaccinated, hence why we have come back to we are supporting the Faster Together campaign. We're encouraging Canadians to get vaccinated, because the faster we get Canadians vaccinated, then the faster we can get back together and get back to doing the things that we want to be doing, like going out for dinner with friends, or going to a concert, or visiting friends and family. It's a precarious line if employers are starting to demand that employees get vaccinated. And so I just put up a warning flag on that.
I'm going to switch to a different policy level question for a moment that again has come up a number of times, and that's about commercial insurance. I know we've heard a lot about this, about soaring rates. Is there any reprieve in sight? Is there anything you can share, Chris, at the provincial level, or Beth at the federal level? Anything being done to constrain or support businesses related to constrain or support the rate increases, or support businesses to accommodate the significant changes they've experienced in commercial insurance?
Well, the Insurance Bureau of Canada has been working with industry specifically with a number of sectors on this issue specifically. 2019 was the start of a hardening, which was a time in the industry, in the insurance industry, when we saw, underwriters leaving or cutting back, and the rebalancing of the liabilities happening in the insurance industry. The Insurance Bureau of Canada has done some work with a number of sectors, including the tourism and hospitality sector. They just released a report in the last couple of days, and we've shared it across our social media feeds. Within that report, there are some specific recommendations for assisting the tourism and hospitality industry. Some of the recommendations are mean working with government. And so we will be picking up the charge and working with our partners around the provinces and territories, the PTIA table, to address those recommendations and see what we can do to move them forward. But as it stands right now, there isn't a reprieve from escalating premiums in sight. And I would suggest that that the industry is actually finding its new normal. And I know that's not what people want to hear, but I've always tried to be honest with everyone. And that's what we're seeing, is we're seeing a new normal as far as what premium rates are, and what level of coverage those premium rates will purchase.
Yeah, I think Beth's absolutely right, and it feels like an awful long time ago that me and Beth were working together on surveys and getting them out to the membership. But last year, when we started to pick up via our member surveys the level of rate increases that were happening on the front line for people's premiums, it became something that was on our radar, and we certainly took to the provincial and now the federal government as something that they should be aware of and potentially looking to act. I think the IBC, the report that was released a couple of days ago, it's very interesting. It details the sort of systematic problems that we've had for some time in the insurance market in Canada as a whole. This isn't something that's simply happened in response to COVID-19, but it is something that has made it significantly worse. And I think there are some, I think we could hopefully share the link, one of us, to that report, because it is a very interesting report to get to grips with. But again, there are, examples abroad, particularly in Europe right now, where government are stepping into the breach to potentially, work on a public-private partnership level to help specifically with events and key events, in terms of being at risk from cancellation because of COVID or pandemic-related reasons. So I'm hopeful that that there may be, I accept what Beth is saying. I think we are going to have sort of, this is the new level of premiums moving forward. But, if, and I hope this doesn't happen, but, perhaps the numbers start going in the wrong direction again and events are cancelled and we don't have the, the summer that we hope for. I hope the government does take into account how insurance and business liability is a key part of people's reopening plans and being able to put on the experiences that we're talking about. So there might not be some short-term answers coming down the road, but I hope that we can work to ensure that people are protected as we go through this sort of recovery program period, because we're going to have plenty of false starts during this summer. I hope there are a few of them, and when we reopen borders, I'm sure there will be again false starts where we take one step backwards. But we have to ensure that businesses aren't put off going by their normal businesses and putting on big events for big gatherings because they can't get insurance to be able to go ahead with it. So I think Beth is right. Credit again to Beth for raising this on the national level. It's something that hadn't been, I think, talked about a huge amount, and I think it's something that we've definitely got to keep a watching brief on and be flexible going forward. And so I'll pass it on.
Yeah, and I see Beth's added a link here to that report. Kevin's just posed a question as well here about First Nation communities. So, to what extent are we here? I guess I'll ask the question at an Ontario level about sort of either regionalization, which I know is, the government has been steering away from at the moment as it relates to reopening, but where there are communities that have very high levels of vaccination. Some of the First Nation communities are 80% plus. Is there the opportunity for there to be a differentiated response or reopening plan? Chris, I don't know if that's something you want to address.
I think, to be brutally honest, right now, no. And I think that's because the government has decided that under the previous color-coded framework that we had, where some people were in green and were enjoying what felt like normal life, they could eat in, they could eat out, they could go out. And whilst areas like Toronto and Peel were in grey and lockdown, people were traveling. People were traveling to the next door public health unit to get a haircut or see their friends and have a drink and have something to eat. And so I think the government has decided in the short term that they want to keep people, they want a province-wide approach, and that they're not going to be going to that individual health unit approach again because of the fact that people were traveling and in their view transmitting COVID-19, which is something that we continue to argue about the statistics and the evidence to prove that. But I think this is going to be an issue that is continuously raised during our stage 1, stage 2 and stage 3 in Ontario reopening plan, because there are going to be large parts of the province that have very few cases, if any, and aren't contributing to any of the use of ICU beds in our hospitals. And so I think this is going to be a call that gets louder as we progress through the summer, that certain parts of the region or certain parts of the province shouldn't be held back by areas that have high caseloads. Just at this moment, Kevin, I'm afraid that I don't see any inclination on that being put into legislation and a framework. But I know that it's something that is going to be at the top of our agenda moving forward. And I think this is all going to move very quickly over the summer if cases continue to fall. And I think we will get some movement, but nothing for certain at the moment being indicated by government.
Thanks, Chris. Marcia, maybe I'll come to you first with this one. And this is a little bit more forward-looking now, and that is, where do you see the opportunities? One of the questions that came in was about opportunities to build and expand new experiences, new product development, expand our capacity, expand our infrastructure. I know on the one hand, we're still very much at a survival and then rebuilding what's been lost phase. But at the same time, we can't take our eye off a longer term opportunity. So do you want to comment maybe on some of what you and your organization have been started down the road, and then Beth and Chris, maybe where you see some of the opportunities to attract new investment and stimulate kind of the next level of demand generators for the country?
It is really a critical area of Canada remaining competitive. I know that I often say that, marketing and the strength of your brand is a great way to remain competitive in the short and the medium term. But over the long term, you must have the most compelling experiences you can. That's what retains your competitiveness over a durable period of time. So Destination Canada has, with our new strategy this year, is now going to take a much more active role in the future in destination development work. We have many parts of the federal family and provincial agencies with some investment in tourism, trying to encourage, private sector money to come to the tourism industry as well. But what hasn't really been in place to any great extent in our industry, surprisingly, is a real strategy around how to strengthen clusters and corridors over the long term, to build a real ecosystem around tourism, which doesn't always end with tourism. I mean, if you think about clusters that get built around skiing or mountain biking, it creates retail opportunities, it creates manufacturing opportunities in those spaces as well. So we're trying to provide a consumer demand informed strategy to our partners across government to better enable them to make investments that we see as having better return on investment for government's funding, and also that will be more successful in attracting those monies. So we've just done a huge piece of reconnaissance work with all of our provincial and territorial partners to understand what they have in the way of strategic plans right now, who they're working with, and where we can best enable that. And we're just finishing up that phase, and then we'll be picking for the probably 2021, 22 some I guess initial projects that will help to prove the model and begin a longer term rollout across Canada. Sorry, I'm just going to add one little point to that. I tend to focus a lot on talking about the product experience, but in my mind, destination development also very much affects how we influence policy making that changes labor laws, changes transportation policy, changes border access rules, CBSA, how they operate. So destination development really is about thinking about all the elements that make up a travel experience and trying to influence them to make it a better travel experience.
Yeah, I mean,
Thanks,
to Marcia's point, as we enter the recovery period, as we come out of this crisis, we've got a lot of learnings. We have had to be creative as an industry. We've had to be flexible. We've had to be patient. We've had to think about new ways of doing things. And I think that there's a huge opportunity there for our industry to think about new ways of interacting with our guests, new ways of talking about our industry and talking about our destination, and not taking for granted all of those things that we have for so long. I mean, we think about all those conferences and trade shows that we've all attended as great opportunities to network and learn something. The economic impact of those has been missing from our economy for a year and a half now, and so we've got and we're scared that Zoom is going to take over and replace some of that, and so we're going to have to find new ways of doing business. And so all of that creativity that we've had to rely on over the last year and a half, we need to continue to rely on it, because we're going to have to continue to be adaptable, and do things not just because that's the way it's always been done.
Yeah, this is the problem when you sit on a panel with Marcia and Beth, is that they have great answers, and then you're the third person and you need to add to that. But I would just add that, one of the most frustrating part of being in the position that I've had and previous positions at TIAC over the last 15 months is hearing about these experiences, hearing about these new innovations, hearing about these very new grassroots, innovative, new businesses on the front line that we've heard some about in the Elevating Canada Experiences Fund. That people are creating from their own imagination and innovation and showcasing what is available off the beaten track and across the country, is that I haven't been able to experience them myself yet. And so I think one of the things that we can do as an advocacy organization is drag ourselves out of downtown areas and get out and put the spotlight on them. And when we do media work, make sure that they're being covered, and just try and grow these new experiences as part of the discussion as we move forward. And so that's something we're definitely going to be doing this summer. We're going to be getting off the beaten track and hopefully shining the spotlight on the innovation that's happening across the province.
Great. I'm going to come back to you now sort of with a couple of themes and let you respond to them as you like. But a couple of questions have come up just in the last few minutes in the chat about the types of testing that are being used. And, without necessarily getting into a discussion about which one should be used, it's more a question of, how do businesses know? Where should businesses be looking for the guidance on what standards? Does this documentation, does this test say what I think it says? And how should businesses handle that? And then I'll also just kind of throw the question about quarantines out there, because they're very much related to the testing protocols as well. And do you see any opportunity for, through more testing, reduction and easing of the quarantine requirements? So a few different areas. I'll let you take it where you want to take it, but they're questions that I didn't want to just leave hanging in the chat box there.
So from a testing perspective, when I was at TIAC, we shared a great session that the World Travel and Tourism Council did, kind of explaining the different kinds of tests and vaccines that were available. And I think that we need to continue to look to the experts on their recommendations based in science. Now, the one thing that is also important to remember is that not all scientists agree with each other. We've certainly seen that over the course of our lifetime, but most dramatically over the course of the last year and a half. So, I think that you want to make sure that you're looking to reputable organizations or associations that for the information that you're looking for, as well as to your public health authority, as much as the public health authorities have seen have really come across as being kind of anti-business and not collaborative partners. In the end, their mandate is the same as ours, and that is to make sure that everyone stays healthy. And so I would, but I would also encourage the exploration of new ideas. Again, I go back to this idea of being creative. I see Al's posted something in the chat about germicidal ultraviolet, and this is a new idea, and he's having a hard time getting the attention of the people that could make the decision to use this kind of technology to help in large settings, help to effectively use science to kill the virus in large settings, because they're so focused on everything else. I would just say to Al and to anybody else that's looking at new ways of doing things when it comes to testing and cleaning protocols and all of that, to keep at it, to keep working on those ideas. What they say, necessity is the mother of invention. And so I think that we will see, as the focus stops being so concentrated on PCR tests and rapid tests, we're seeing the evolution even of the rapid tests now. So I think that with time we'll see a more openness to new ideas around what is on offer for testing and for cleaning.
I'll maybe just pile on a bit with Beth there. Creativity, of course, as we face new obstacles, we need everyone's contributions to that creativity, and we can see what can happen when the world puts its mind to something like creating a vaccine. Those timelines were shortened by a quarter, or by 25% of the time. That's what I mean. At any rate, in the same way, I think that we are looking to global health authorities and global tourism authorities to give some guidance around how we might all come out of this together. I know, governments, while we may not always like how their restrictions play out at the business level, they are very much engaged with G20 nations, with G7 nations, and finding best practices in trying to establish common protocols, in ensuring that this doesn't become a barrier for travel in future. So there is a lot of discussion and collaboration, I think, going on, not only between provincial and federal levels, but between nations trying to solve these problems. So we can expect Canada to be adopting what they see as the best practices in the world.
Great. We're getting towards the end here. We want to, I think, thank everyone for being part of this. I want to thank our panelists. This has been, we got into a lot of detail about a lot of different areas, and it was nice to have the time to do that, spend over an hour just on the questions themselves. So thank you for that. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Marcia. Thank you, Chris. The recording of this session will be available on the TIAC website. So we'll be able to find it there. If you're watching it with friends and family, don't spoil the twist ending for them. And thank you, everyone. We're, as I said off the top, I continue to be inspired by the spirit of collegiality and collaboration across the industry. It's been remarkable to this point, and I know it will continue to be the hallmark of what we are all so proud of in this industry. So thank you to all of you, and I hope I've covered it all. Landon or any of the team, if there's anything I've missed, any details I've missed, you can jump in, but I hope I've covered it all. And thank you again for being part of the town hall today, and we'll look forward to seeing everyone soon in person, I hope.